Hello and welcome to another one of Legion's Baldur's Gate videos. I spent several hours playing both the old series and the new series of Baldur's Gate, and I love both. I'm not surprised Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year along with many other awards, and in my opinion probably should have won a lot more. But Baldur's Gate 3 has had so much coverage recently, I thought it'd be interesting to compare the old Baldur's Gate with Baldur's Gate 3. I've noticed that there are 4 types of Baldur's Gate players. Baldur's Gate 3 players who have no experience whatsoever with the originals and don't always feel comfortable enough to comment on them. The original Baldur's Gate 3 players who refuse to acknowledge that Baldur's Gate 3 even exists. The Baldur's Gate 3 players who fired up the original titles and were put off by the antiquity of the isometric view and the dated graphics, and that's fair enough. Then there's the ones like me, who have tried to see the best and worst of each game individually. All this being said, I encourage a playthrough of each game. Playing the original Baldur's Gate is entirely up to you, but why not give it a shot? Worst that can happen is that you don't like it and you can move on. Although I've tried to limit them, there will be some unavoidable spoilers in this game, so please be aware. And now, 3 things that the original Baldur's Gate games did better than Baldur's Gate 3. The combat in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 is better than Baldur's Gate 3 for a few reasons. One key aspect is that Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 use a real-time with pause combat system, allowing players to strategically pause the game to issue commands and plan their next moves. This system gives players more control over individual actions and party coordination. The enemies aren't limited to their turns, so if there are 10 bandits that get a jump on you, then you'd better hope that you prepared appropriately. The consequences of some of your combat actions can carry over. If you throw a flask or cast fireball in order to take out multiple enemies at once, then you need to be mindful of non-enemies that could carry an influence penalty that, if low enough, will make items more expensive to buy, or the normally neutral guards may attack you on sight. In contrast, Baldur's Gate 3 uses a turn-based combat system which can feel slower paced and may not suit every player's preferences. Additionally, some players feel that the combat encounters in Baldur's Gate 3 lack the same level of tactical depth and complexity as those of earlier games. Some players find turn-based combat less dynamic and engaging compared to real-time with pause system found in earlier games. Ultimately, preference for combat systems can vary among players, so what one player may consider better in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 may prefer the combat in Baldur's Gate 3, and that is understandable, but the basis of this is that the fact that they don't share the same combat mechanics, and for my part, the original series is a lot more difficult to master.
What is it now?
Get down, everyone! Oh, for the love of crumb cake! That wasn't even close, was it?
Enemies. This section will probably cover a lot more spoilers than any other section, so please be mindful. There are several interesting enemy backstories in Baldur's Gate 1, but I will focus on the main antagonist. Sarevok and the hero of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were rescued by Gorion and a group of harpers when they were children. These ballspawn were to be sacrificed by the priests of the Lord of Murder. But where our hero was taken in by Gorion, a wise and powerful mage, Sarevok was left alone to become a street urchin until Raltar Anshev, an ambitious mage and member of the Iron Throne, saw potential in him and took him in. Sarevok's primary motivation is his ambition to become a god. He believes that by achieving godhood, he will finally escape the shadow of his infamous father, Baal. Despite his villainous actions, Sarevok believes he is on the path of redemption. He sees himself as a necessary evil, sacrificing others to achieve a greater good. If we move on to Baldur's Gate 2, we are introduced to John Irenicus, voiced by the legendary David Warner. Irenicus traps us and experiments on us. We find out that he has not only subjected us to torture, but has murdered companions that we may have traveled with for several hours in the previous game. He is truly worthy of our revenge, but we see glimpses of someone who isn't a one-dimensional madman. He is an extremely powerful mage who is beloved by his people and tried to become as powerful as possible not only for his own advancement, but for his people. He was enthralled by his queen, whom artists gave their life for, just trying to recreate her beauty. When he fell out of grace and was punished, both he and his sister, who was a conspirator to his ambition, were cast out and suffered enough that she had to resort to becoming an undead in order to avoid her own destruction. Irenicus sees an opportunity to take our untapped power from an evil deity and form it into something that he can use to cure his sister and find redemption for himself. Even the people that he harmed the most see the good in him and understand his motivation, even if he cannot be forgiven. I really did enjoy the conversations and interactions with the enemies in Baldur's Gate 3, but one thing that I notice is that they often have one focus and no further agenda than to act as an antagonist. They are often the typical cartoon enemies whose only interest is gaining more power. There is an exception or two, but turns out they had arcs as companions, which created a false sense of contention. Ketheric Thorm is a great example of how close the game came to realizing the essence of an enemy like the games that came before it. He ruled Rethwim from Moonrise Towers and was beloved by his people and his family and Saloon. Unknown to him, Shar infiltrated her will into the kingdom, and when his wife and daughter passed, he turned to Shar, built an army of dark justiciars, and trapped the Aasimar Aelin in order to bring his daughter back to life. But that's the extent of it. There's no further development or ability to relate our heroes to his point of view. He is influenced by a mysterious entity, and our only duty is to exterminate him. I asked a few Baldur's Gate 3 players their opinion of a memorable enemy, and each one replied with Raphael. But Raphael's a devil, right? Did I miss something? I won't comment whether or not I tested the Mazor waters, but anyway, this isn't about me. So Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Sarevok, a powerful half-brother with compelling backstory, a personal connection to the protagonist. His pursuit of godhood drives the main narrative. Irenicus, a manipulative and cunning mage who imprisons the protagonist and plays a complex role in shaping their destiny. We have a tactical challenge with both Sarevok and Irenicus, where they present significant combat challenges requiring strategic thinking and effective party management to overcome. Their story integration is vital. These villains are deeply entwined within the plot, driving the protagonist's motivations and influencing major decisions. In Baldur's Gate 3, we have the mysterious entity. While the identity and motivations of the entity remain largely unknown, its influence through the parasitic tadpoles add unique layer of suspense and horror. The mysterious entity's role is intriguing, but its direct involvement in the story feels less prominent compared to Sarevok and Irenicus, with a focus on its influence through the parasitic tadpoles, and we simply don't always know why. But to be fair, the story in Baldur's Gate 3 may not be over. I encourage everyone to play as a Dark Urge once, to see where the story might take us. The Mind's Eye. So I'm going to discuss something that's a little bit more abstract. Nothing, and I mean nothing, beats your own imagination, so this may be unfair to Baldur's Gate 3. But let me try to explain. Baldur's Gate 3 has modern graphics and visuals that aim to realistically depict characters, environments, and actions. While this can be visually stunning, it leaves less room for interpretation by the player's imagination. In contrast, the original Baldur's Gate series relied on 2D sprites and backgrounds, inviting players to fill in the visual gaps with their own imagination.
Let us go!
I won't let you leave, not when I'm so close to unlocking your power.
We don't want anything from you.
Enough! I will no longer listen to the babbling of ignorant children.
Baldur's Gate 3, being a more recent game, prides itself on intricate details in character designs, animations, and environments. While this can enhance immersion, it can also limit the player's ability to imagine things differently. The older Baldur's Gate series often left more to the imagination due to limitations in graphical fidelity. The original Baldur's Gate games heavily relied on text-based descriptions and dialogue to convey the story and characters, allowing players to create mental images based on these cues.
The Absolute. They work together like a drug. I did not feel I was compelled to act against my will. I felt ecstatic to serve. Every action seemed a deliberate choice. The best choice. Even though I could no more have resisted its commands than flesh can resist decay.
In comparison, Baldur's Gate 3 features extensive voice acting and cinematic cutscenes that leave less to the imagination in terms of character interactions and storytelling. Ultimately, while Baldur's Gate 3 offers a visually impressive and immersive experience, the original Baldur's Gate series had a charm that stemmed from engaging the player's imagination to fill in the blanks left by its limitations.
Damn forest always reminds me of pansy elves.
The mind's eye has more space to roam and creates a personalized version of the game world in the original series. And those are my 3 things that I felt that the original Baldur's Gate series did better than Baldur's Gate 3. Let me be clear, I am not saying that 1 and 2 are better than Baldur's Gate 3.
Whatever.
There are several things about each game that make them unique enough to stand on their own. But for the purposes of the video, I'm simply taking specific game elements and creating the conversation. I have no doubt that there will be people who disagree with me, and that's fine. The beauty of these games is the ability to recognize just how well they were done, and to simply focus on things that made them memorable. If there were things that I missed or got wrong, then feel free to let me know in the comments. We read all the comments and appreciate the interaction. If you liked or hated the video, give it a thumbs up or down. If you liked this video, maybe you'll like this one as well. And thank you so much for watching, everybody, and have a great day.